The stale air of the funeral home hung heavy with the scent of lilies and unspoken grief. Martha Collins stood rigidly by her husband's closed casket, her face a mask of controlled fury. The polished mahogany reflected the flickering candlelight, mirroring the turmoil within her. She hadn't cried, not a single tear. Only a cold, hard knot of anger resided in her chest, a bitter lump that threatened to choke her. Her Richard was gone, taken too soon, snatched away by a heart attack that had left her reeling, alone in a world that suddenly felt hostile and unforgiving. The emptiness was a gaping wound, raw and bleeding, and in her pain, she sought something to blame. Reverend Elijah Jackson approached cautiously, his dark eyes filled with a gentle sorrow that only deepened her resentment. He was a tall man, his presence commanding yet calming, a stark contrast to the chaotic storm raging inside her. He extended a hand, his movements deliberate and respectful. "Mrs. Collins," he began softly, his voice a low rumble that carried a surprising warmth. "I'm Reverend Jackson. Please accept my condolences." Martha flinched as if struck. She didn't take his hand. Instead, she stared at him, her gaze cold and accusatory. The lilies seemed to wilt under her icy glare. "Condolences?" she spat, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "What good are your condolences? What good are the prayers of a man like you?" The question hung in the air, heavy and charged with unspoken accusations. Reverend Jackson's expression didn't change. He remained calm, his patience seemingly inexhaustible. A lesser man might have flinched, might have recoiled from the venom in her words. But Reverend Jackson stood firm, his silence more eloquent than any apology. "I understand your pain, Mrs. Collins," he said quietly, his voice steady and even. "Losing a loved one is devastating, but there is comfort to be found." "Comfort?" Martha scoffed, her voice rising in pitch. "Comfort? You talk about comfort? My husband is dead, and people like you are the reason why there's so much pain in this world." The words tumbled out, raw and unfiltered, a torrent of bitterness that had been building inside her for years. She hadn't intended to say them, not exactly. But the grief, the anger, the years of simmering resentment had finally boiled over. She felt a strange sense of release, even as a wave of shame washed over her. Reverend Jackson remained silent for a long moment, his gaze unwavering. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to soothe her with platitudes. He simply listened, absorbing the torrent of her anger, letting her words wash over him. He seemed to understand, somehow, the depth of her pain, the complexity of her grief. "I know you're hurting, Mrs. Collins," he said finally, his voice soft but firm. "And I know you're angry. But anger won't bring Richard back. It won't ease your pain. Only forgiveness. Only understanding." "Understanding." Martha laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Understanding? You don't understand. You can't understand. You've never had to fight for a place in this world. Never had to endure the indignities that people like me have faced. You've never had to watch as your opportunities were stolen, your dreams crushed by the very system that's supposed to protect you." She stopped, breathless, her chest heaving. The anger was still there, a burning ember in the pit of her stomach. But something else was there too, a flicker of vulnerability, a hint of the deep-seated pain that fueled her rage. She looked at Reverend Jackson, and for the first time, she saw not an enemy, but a man who seemed to understand her pain, even if he didn't share it. But even that small glimmer of understanding was quickly extinguished by the rising tide of her grief. She turned away, her back to him, and stared at the closed casket, the image of her late husband a constant reminder of her loss and the anger that threatened to consume her. The funeral service was a blur of somber hymns and hushed condolences. Martha remained detached, a statue of grief and resentment, her eyes fixed on the polished wood of her husband's casket. The words of the officiant washed over her, meaningless sounds in a world suddenly devoid of color and joy. She felt a profound sense of isolation, a chasm separating her from the mourners around her, from the comforting words intended to soothe her pain. Reverend Jackson, however, remained a persistent presence. He watched her from the corner of his eye, his expression a mixture of compassion and concern. He understood her anger, sensed the deep-seated pain that fueled her bitterness. He knew that simple words of comfort would be insufficient, that a deeper connection was needed to reach her wounded soul. After the service, as the mourners began to disperse, Reverend Jackson approached Martha again. He stood beside her, offering a gentle hand on her arm. This time, she didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. Perhaps the exhaustion of her emotions had dulled her defenses. Or perhaps a tiny seed of curiosity had been planted in the barren soil of her heart. "Mrs. Collins," he began softly, his voice a low, reassuring murmur. "I know you're hurting. I want to offer you a prayer. A prayer for peace, for healing, for the strength to get through this difficult time." He paused, giving her a chance to respond, to accept or refuse his offer. He saw the flicker of resistance in her eyes, the tightening of her jaw. He knew this would not be easy. "No," Martha said sharply, her voice tight with unshed tears. "I don't need your prayers. I don't need your pity." Her words were laced with venom, a bitter cocktail of grief and prejudice. Reverend Jackson winced inwardly, but he didn't flinch. He had expected this. He knew that her anger wasn't directed solely at her loss. It was a manifestation of a deeper, more ingrained prejudice. "Mrs. Collins," he said gently, "I understand your pain. But please believe me, my intention is not to pity you, but to offer comfort. Prayer can be a source of strength, a way to find solace in the midst of sorrow." "Your prayers," she scoffed, her voice rising in pitch. "Your prayers are for your people, for your kind, not for someone like me, not for a white woman who's lost everything." The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. Reverend Jackson felt a pang of sadness, but also a surge of determination. He wouldn't be deterred. He wouldn't let her prejudice win. "Mrs. Collins," he said patiently, "prayer is for everyone. It's a connection to something greater than ourselves, a source of strength that transcends race, religion, or background. It's about finding peace, about finding hope in the face of despair." "Hope," she repeated, her voice laced with sarcasm. "Hope? You talk about hope? Where's the hope in a world where people like you are constantly oppressed? Where's the hope in a system that's rigged against us? My husband worked his whole life, and for what? To die alone, leaving me with nothing but this emptiness." Her voice broke, and for a moment, the carefully constructed wall of her anger crumbled. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them back, her face hardening again. Reverend Jackson remained silent for a moment, allowing her to vent her emotions. He understood her pain, her frustration, her anger. He knew that her prejudice was a defense mechanism, a shield against the pain of a world that had often treated her unfairly. But he also knew that beneath the anger, beneath the bitterness, there was a woman who was hurting, a woman who needed compassion and understanding. "Mrs. Collins," he said softly, "I offer you my prayer, not as a symbol of pity, but as an offering of hope. A prayer for healing, for peace, for the strength to face your grief and emerge stronger on the other side." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "Will you let me pray for you?" Martha stared at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger, sadness, and a flicker of something else, perhaps doubt, perhaps curiosity. She remained silent, her silence a deafening refusal. Reverend Jackson, though disappointed, knew this was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey. The morning light was pale and weak, filtering through the gaps in the blinds of Martha's bedroom. The house felt strangely empty, the silence amplifying the absence of Richard's familiar presence. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of her grief pressing down on her like a physical burden. The events of yesterday replayed in her mind, a loop of anger and resentment. Reverend Jackson's persistent attempts at comfort, her own bitter rejections, the raw, unfiltered expression of her prejudice. It all felt heavy, suffocating. She finally got out of bed, the cold floor a stark contrast to the warmth of the blankets. She moved mechanically, her body numb, her mind still reeling from the emotional turmoil of the previous day. She made coffee, the bitter aroma doing little to lift her spirits. She sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the steaming mug, the silence broken only by the rhythmic drip of the coffee maker. As she reached for a sugar packet, something caught her eye. A small, folded piece of paper lay on the table, nestled amongst the clutter of newspapers and mail. It wasn't there before. She picked it up, her fingers trembling slightly. The paper was plain, unmarked, the handwriting elegant and unfamiliar. It was a simple note, containing just a few lines of text. Her heart pounded in her chest as she unfolded the paper and began to read. The words were simple, yet they resonated with a power that surprised her. They were the prayer Reverend Jackson had attempted to offer her the previous day, a prayer for peace, for healing, for the strength to overcome her grief. It spoke of forgiveness, of understanding, of finding solace in the face of loss. It was a message of hope, a beacon in the darkness of her despair. The prayer read, "Heavenly Father, grant me the strength to bear this burden. Help me to find peace in the midst of my sorrow. Guide me towards forgiveness, towards understanding, towards healing. Give me the courage to face my grief and emerge stronger on the other side. May your love surround me, comfort me, and guide me through this difficult time. Amen." Martha reread the prayer several times, each reading deepening its impact. The words weren't just words. They were a balm to her wounded soul, a gentle hand reaching out to her in the darkness. She felt a strange sense of calm wash over her, a stillness that had been absent since Richard's death. The anger that had consumed her for so long seemed to dissipate, replaced by a sense of wonder and a growing curiosity. Who had left this note? How had they known what she needed? The questions swirled in her mind, but they were secondary to the profound impact of the prayer itself. It was a message of hope, a message of comfort, a message that resonated deeply within her soul. It was a message that challenged her deeply ingrained prejudices, a message that hinted at a path towards healing and understanding. She considered the possibility that Reverend Jackson himself had left the note, but something about the elegance of the handwriting, the quiet dignity of the message, felt different. It wasn't the slightly hurried, slightly hesitant style of the pastor she had encountered yesterday. This felt deliberate, carefully crafted, infused with a profound sense of understanding. The note was more than just a prayer. It was a gesture of compassion, a silent act of kindness that pierced through her anger and touched her heart. It was a message that spoke to the deepest recesses of her soul, a message that offered her a glimmer of hope in the midst of her despair. It was a message that would change her life. She knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that she needed to find the person who had written it, to understand the source of this unexpected kindness, this profound act of faith. She needed to understand the message, and perhaps herself. The note, small and unassuming as it was, had become a lifeline in her sea of grief, a beacon guiding her toward a path she hadn't even known existed. The prayer, tucked safely in her wallet, became Martha's constant companion. She reread it throughout the day, the simple yet powerful words slowly chipping away at the hardened shell of her anger and prejudice. The initial shock of finding the note had given way to a quiet contemplation, a period of introspection she hadn't allowed herself since Richard's death. The grief was still there, a constant ache in her chest, but it was no longer the sole occupant of her heart. A space had opened up, a small crack in the wall of bitterness she had built around herself. She found herself questioning her own anger, her own prejudices. The words forgiveness and understanding echoed in her mind, challenging her long-held beliefs, her ingrained biases. She began to examine her past, her relationships, the sources of her resentment. She recalled incidents, both large and small, where her own prejudices had clouded her judgment, where her assumptions had led to misunderstandings and hurt. She thought of the times she'd dismissed people based on their race, their religion, their background. She thought of the casual racism she'd absorbed from her community, the subtle biases that had shaped her worldview. She realized how easily she had judged others, how readily she had attributed negative qualities to entire groups of people based on limited experiences and harmful stereotypes. The weight of these realizations pressed down on her, a heavy burden of guilt and regret. The prayer's message of compassion and empathy resonated deeply within her, challenging her to confront her own shortcomings. It was a mirror reflecting back at her the ugliness of her prejudice, the pain she had inflicted on others, and the damage she had done to herself. She began to see the interconnectedness of things. The way her own anger and resentment had isolated her, had prevented her from forming genuine connections with people from different backgrounds. She thought of Reverend Jackson, the man she had so vehemently rejected. His calm demeanor, his unwavering patience, his persistent offer of comfort. It all seemed different now, viewed through the lens of the prayer's message. She saw not an enemy, but a man who had extended a hand of compassion to her in her darkest hour. She had dismissed him as one of them, a representative of a group she had unfairly judged, but the prayer had forced her to consider the possibility that her judgment had been flawed, that her assumptions had been wrong. The seed of doubt had taken root, growing steadily within her heart. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, a dramatic shift in perspective. It was a gradual process, a slow, deliberate dismantling of her ingrained prejudices. She was still grappling with her grief, still struggling with the pain of Richard's loss. But the prayer had given her a new perspective, a new framework for understanding her own emotions, her own biases, and her own place in the world. It had opened her eyes to the possibility of forgiveness, not just for others, but for herself. The anger was still there, but it was now intertwined with a growing sense of self-awareness, a burgeoning understanding of the harm she had caused, and a desire to make amends. The prayer was a starting point, a first step on a long and difficult journey of self-discovery and reconciliation. It was a journey she was finally ready to begin. Days turned into weeks, and the small, folded piece of paper remained Martha's constant companion. The prayer's message had become a mantra, a quiet guide leading her through the labyrinth of her own emotions. The initial shock and wonder had given way to a deeper, more profound self-reflection. She found herself constantly revisiting her past, examining her experiences, and confronting the roots of her prejudice. It wasn't a comfortable process. It was painful, unsettling, and at times deeply embarrassing. She had to confront the ugliness of her own biases, the casual racism she had absorbed from her environment, the unfair judgments she had made based on limited information and harmful stereotypes. She had to acknowledge the ways in which her prejudice had shaped her worldview, had influenced her relationships, and had ultimately caused her pain. She began to recall specific incidents, moments where her prejudice had manifested itself in subtle yet damaging ways. She remembered the time she'd crossed the street to avoid a group of black teenagers, the way she'd instinctively clutched her purse tighter when a black man walked past her on the street. She remembered the times she'd made assumptions about people based on their race or religion, the times she'd dismissed their perspectives without even considering their validity. The more she dug, the more she realized how deeply ingrained her prejudice was, how subtly it had shaped her perceptions and her actions. It wasn't something she had consciously chosen. It was something she had absorbed from society, from the media, from the people around her. It was a product of her upbringing, her environment, the narrative she had internalized without question. She also began to see the unfairness of her judgments. She realized that she had often judged entire groups of people based on the actions of a few, that she had allowed stereotypes to dictate her perceptions, that she had failed to see the individuality and complexity of human beings. She had allowed fear and ignorance to dictate her actions, to cloud her judgment, and to prevent her from forming genuine connections with people from different backgrounds. She thought about the people she had judged, the people she had dismissed, the people she had wronged. She imagined their perspectives, their experiences, their feelings. She realized that her prejudice had not only hurt them, but it had also isolated her, had prevented her from experiencing the richness and diversity of human connection. It had robbed her of the opportunity to build meaningful relationships with people who might have enriched her life in countless ways. The process of confronting her past was excruciating, but it was also liberating. It was a painful acknowledgement of her own flaws, but it was also a step towards healing, towards growth, towards a more just and compassionate understanding of the world. The prayer had given her the courage to face her own demons, to confront the ugliness of her prejudice, and to begin the long and difficult journey of self-reflection and reconciliation. It was a journey that would require courage, humility, and a willingness to change, but it was a journey she was finally ready to undertake. The seed of doubt planted by the prayer had blossomed into a full-blown awareness of her own shortcomings, and the path towards self-improvement was now clearly visible. The decision to seek out Reverend Jackson wasn't easy. Martha wrestled with it for days, her mind a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to avoid him, to retreat back into the familiar comfort of her prejudice. Part of her felt a deep-seated shame, a reluctance to confront the ugliness of her past behavior. But the prayer, that simple yet powerful message of hope and forgiveness, kept pulling her forward. She couldn't shake the feeling that the note was somehow connected to him, that it was a message intended for her, a message that held the key to understanding her own pain and her own prejudices. The more she reflected on it, the more she realized that her anger towards him had been a defense mechanism, a way of deflecting her own grief and self-loathing. She had projected her pain onto him, blaming him for the problems she had created for herself. The self-awareness that had begun to bloom within her made her realize the unfairness of her judgment. She had allowed her own biases to cloud her perception, to prevent her from seeing the humanity of the man who had offered her comfort in her darkest hour. The note had shattered that perception, had forced her to confront the possibility that she had been wrong, that her judgment had been clouded by prejudice and fear. She knew that seeking him out would require humility, a willingness to admit her mistakes, a willingness to confront the ugliness of her own behavior. It would require her to step outside of her comfort zone, to engage with someone she had previously dismissed as other. But the thought of understanding the source of the note, of finally finding peace, outweighed her fear and her shame. She decided to visit his church. She had never been to a black church before, and the thought filled her with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. She imagined the unfamiliar hymns, the unfamiliar rituals, the unfamiliar faces. She wondered how she would be received, whether she would be judged, whether her presence would be unwelcome. But the thought of the prayer, of the message of hope and forgiveness, gave her the courage to proceed. She knew that she was embarking on a journey of self-discovery, a journey that would require her to confront her own prejudices and to embrace a more compassionate understanding of the world. She knew that it wouldn't be easy, that it would require courage, humility, and a willingness to change. But she was ready. She had to be. The prayer had shown her a path towards healing, towards understanding, and towards a more meaningful life. And she was determined to follow it, wherever it might lead. She dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that felt both respectful and comfortable. She took a deep breath, said a silent prayer, and stepped out into the world, ready to confront her past and embrace her future. The weight of her grief was still there, but it was now mingled with a sense of hope, a sense of purpose, and a quiet determination to find the answer she sought. The church was a vibrant hub of activity, a stark contrast to the quiet solemnity of the funeral home where she had first encountered Reverend Jackson. Music spilled out onto the street, a joyful blend of gospel and spirituals that filled Martha with a sense of both awe and apprehension. People bustled in and out, their faces alight with a warmth and energy she hadn't expected. She hesitated at the entrance, her hand hovering over the door handle, a wave of self-doubt washing over her. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of the purpose of her visit. She wasn't here to judge or to be judged. She was here to seek understanding, to find answers. The prayer, folded neatly in her purse, served as a reminder of her intention, a source of strength and courage. With a renewed sense of determination, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The interior of the church was even more vibrant than the exterior suggested. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, illuminating the colorful murals and the joyful faces of the congregation. The air was thick with the scent of incense and the sounds of lively conversation. People greeted each other with warmth and enthusiasm, their smiles genuine and welcoming. Martha felt a wave of surprise wash over her. This was nothing like she had imagined. She found a seat near the back, trying to remain inconspicuous. She observed the congregation, noticing the diversity of ages, races, and backgrounds. There were young children, teenagers, adults, and elderly people, all united by a shared sense of community and faith. She watched as they sang, prayed, and shared stories, their interactions filled with a joy and a sense of belonging that she found deeply moving. After the service, she approached Reverend Jackson, her heart pounding in her chest. He was standing near the altar, talking to a group of people. She waited patiently, watching as he interacted with each person with genuine warmth and concern. When he finally noticed her, his face lit up with a warm smile. "Mrs. Collins," he said, his voice gentle and welcoming. "I wasn't expecting to see you here. I wanted to talk to you," Martha stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her, remembering her previous outburst. "Of course," he said, his eyes filled with compassion. "Please come and sit." He led her to a quiet corner of the church, where they sat down on a pair of chairs. Martha fumbled with the prayer in her purse, finally taking it out and placing it on the table between them. "I found this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "This morning, I believe it was meant for me." Reverend Jackson picked up the note, his eyes scanning the words. He nodded slowly, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "Yes," he said softly. "I wrote it." Martha's eyes widened in surprise. She had assumed someone else had left it, someone who understood her pain and her need for comfort. She hadn't expected it to be him. I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice choked with emotion. "For my behavior at the funeral home. I was wrong. I was cruel." Reverend Jackson smiled gently. "I understand, Mrs. Collins. Grief can bring out the worst in us, but I also believe it can lead us to something better." He spoke to her for a long time, listening patiently as she recounted her past experiences, her prejudices, her struggles with grief and self-loathing. He didn't judge her, didn't condemn her. He simply listened, offering words of comfort and understanding. He shared his own experiences with prejudice, his own struggles with loss, his own journey towards faith and forgiveness. He showed her the beauty of compassion, the power of empathy, and the transformative potential of faith. As she left the church, Martha felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in weeks. The church, which she had approached with fear and apprehension, had become a sanctuary, a place of healing and hope. She knew she had a long way to go, but she also knew that she wasn't alone. She had found a guide, a friend, and a community that would help her navigate the difficult journey ahead. The unexpected encounter had been a turning point, a pivotal moment that would shape the course of her life. Reverend Jackson's office was small but inviting, filled with the warm glow of a late afternoon sun. Books lined the shelves, their spines worn smooth from years of use. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and brewing coffee, a comforting aroma that seemed to soothe Martha's still jumpy nerves. She sat across from him, the weight of her confession still heavy on her chest. He had listened patiently, his gaze unwavering, his expression a mixture of compassion and understanding. "Mrs. Collins," he began, his voice soft yet firm, "your story is not unique. Many people carry burdens of prejudice, burdens of pain, burdens of loss. But the path to healing lies in forgiveness, in understanding, in embracing the power of compassion." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee before continuing. "I've experienced prejudice myself, of course. Growing up in this country as a black man, I've faced discrimination in countless forms, both subtle and overt. I've been judged, dismissed, and underestimated, simply because of the color of my skin." He spoke of his childhood, of the subtle indignities he had endured, the casual racism he had absorbed from society. He spoke of the times he had been denied opportunities, the times he had been treated unfairly, the times he had been forced to fight for his place in a world that often seemed determined to exclude him. "It's easy to succumb to anger, to resentment, to bitterness," he said, his voice filled with a quiet strength. "It's easy to allow those feelings to consume you, to poison your heart, to prevent you from seeing the good in the world. But that's not the path to healing. The path to healing lies in forgiveness, in letting go of the anger, in embracing compassion. He shared stories of his own journey towards forgiveness, of the times he had encountered prejudice and had chosen to respond with kindness and understanding. He spoke of the importance of empathy, of seeing the world through the eyes of others, of recognizing the shared humanity that binds us together. Forgiveness doesn't mean condoning the actions of others, he explained. It doesn't mean forgetting the pain they have caused. It means releasing the anger, the resentment, the bitterness that hold you captive. It means freeing yourself from the burden of hatred, allowing yourself to move forward, to heal, to find peace. He spoke of the importance of understanding, of recognizing the complex factors that contribute to prejudice, the historical injustices, the social inequalities, the ingrained biases that shape our perceptions. He emphasized the need to engage in dialogue, to listen to different perspectives, to challenge our own assumptions, and to strive for a more just and equitable world. Understanding doesn't mean agreeing with everything, he said. It means acknowledging the validity of others' experiences, recognizing their pain, and striving to bridge the divides that separate us. It means creating space for dialogue, for empathy, for compassion. He then spoke of loss, of the pain of losing loved ones, of the grief that can consume us, the despair that can overwhelm us. He shared his own experiences with loss, the pain of losing family members, friends, and mentors. He spoke of the importance of grieving, of allowing ourselves to feel our emotions, of seeking support from others, and of finding solace in faith. Grief is a powerful emotion, he said, his voice soft and compassionate. It can be overwhelming, debilitating, and even destructive. But it's also a natural part of life. It's important to allow ourselves to grieve, to process our emotions, to find healthy ways to cope with our loss. He spoke of the interconnectedness of things, of how prejudice, loss, and forgiveness are all intertwined, how our experiences shape our perceptions, and how our perceptions shape our actions. He emphasized the importance of choosing compassion, of choosing understanding, of choosing forgiveness, not just for others, but for ourselves. He left Martha with a sense of peace, a renewed sense of purpose, and a clearer understanding of the path ahead. The weight of her past was still there, but it was now lighter, less burdensome, less suffocating. She left his office feeling empowered, ready to embark on the transformative journey of self-discovery and reconciliation. Martha started attending services at Reverend Jackson's church regularly. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic conversion. It was a gradual process, a slow unfolding of faith and community. Initially, she felt like an outsider, a stranger in a strange land. The hymns were unfamiliar, the rituals were different, and the faces were predominantly those she had previously categorized as other. But as the weeks passed, she began to feel a sense of belonging, a sense of connection she hadn't experienced before. The sermons were powerful, resonant, and deeply moving. Reverend Jackson's words resonated with her on a profound level, speaking to her grief, her prejudices, and her journey towards healing. He didn't shy away from difficult topics, addressing issues of race, inequality, and injustice with honesty and compassion. He spoke of forgiveness, of understanding, of the importance of empathy and community. His messages were not just theological pronouncements. They were calls to action, invitations to engage with the world in a more just and compassionate way. The music was uplifting, joyful, and deeply spiritual. The gospel choir's voices soared, filling the church with a sense of hope and celebration. Martha found herself singing along, her voice joining the chorus of voices, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never experienced anything like it before. It was a release, a catharsis, a connection to something greater than herself. She also began to connect with members of the congregation. She found herself drawn to their warmth, their kindness, their willingness to embrace her despite her past prejudices. She struck up conversations with people from different backgrounds, learning about their lives, their experiences, their perspectives. She discovered that they were not just other. They were individuals with unique stories, complex personalities, and shared humanity. She found herself particularly drawn to a group of women who met regularly for Bible study. They welcomed her with open arms, sharing their own experiences with grief, loss, and prejudice. They listened patiently as she recounted her journey, offering words of encouragement, support, and understanding. They helped her to process her emotions, to confront her biases, and to embrace a more compassionate worldview. She learned from their stories, their faith, and their resilience. They became her friends, her confidants, her spiritual family. The church wasn't just a place of worship. It was a community, a refuge, a source of strength and support. It was a place where she felt safe, accepted, and loved. It was a place where she could be herself, without judgment, without fear. The sense of community she found there was unexpected, profound, and deeply transformative. It helped her to heal, to grow, to become a better person. The solace she found in the sermons, the music, and the fellowship of the congregation was immeasurable. It was a testament to the power of faith, the power of community, and the transformative potential of human connection. She had come seeking answers, seeking solace, and she had found something far greater, a new sense of belonging, a new sense of purpose, and a new path towards a more fulfilling life. Her journey was far from over, but she now had a community to support her, a faith to guide her, and a renewed sense of hope to sustain her. The transformation wasn't a sudden, dramatic shift. It was a gradual process, a slow and deliberate dismantling of ingrained biases. Martha's newfound faith and the supportive community at Reverend Jackson's church provided the fertile ground for this growth. The seeds of doubt planted by the mysterious prayer had blossomed into a full-fledged awareness of her own prejudices, and she was now actively working to challenge and overcome them. It started with small steps. She began to pay closer attention to her own thoughts and reactions, noticing the subtle ways in which her prejudices still manifested themselves. She became more aware of her own assumptions, her own judgments, her own biases. She challenged herself to question her own perspectives, to consider alternative viewpoints, to recognize the limitations of her own experiences. She actively sought out opportunities to engage in conversations with people from different backgrounds. She struck up conversations with her neighbors, her co-workers, and the people she encountered in her daily life. She listened attentively to their stories, their experiences, their perspectives. She tried to see the world through their eyes, to understand their challenges, their struggles, and their triumphs. She joined a community group focused on social justice, a group she would have previously dismissed as overly idealistic or even radical. She found herself engaged in discussions about race, inequality, and injustice, listening to the experiences of others and sharing her own journey of self-discovery. She was surprised by the openness and willingness of the group members to engage in honest and respectful dialogue, even when their opinions differed. She learned from their perspectives, their insights, and their commitment to social justice. She started volunteering at a local community center, working alongside people from diverse backgrounds. She found herself working alongside people she had previously judged, people she had dismissed based on stereotypes and assumptions. She discovered their kindness, their compassion, their dedication to serving others. She learned from their skills, their knowledge, and their commitment to making a difference in their community. She made a conscious effort to challenge her own biases in her daily interactions. She found herself no longer crossing the street to avoid people of color, no longer clutching her purse tighter when a black man walked past her. She found herself engaging in conversations with people she had previously avoided, listening to their stories, learning from their experiences, and building genuine connections. The change wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, moments of hesitation, moments of backsliding. But the support of her new community, the guidance of Reverend Jackson, and the unwavering strength of her newfound faith helped her to persevere. She learned to forgive herself for her past mistakes, to embrace her imperfections, and to continue striving towards a more just and compassionate understanding of the world. The journey was ongoing, but she was no longer the same person she had been before. She was actively challenging her own biases, actively working to overcome her prejudices, and actively engaging with the world in a more meaningful and fulfilling way. The transformation was a testament to the power of faith, the power of community, and the transformative potential of self-reflection and personal growth. Martha's journey of transformation deepened as she became fully embraced by the vibrant community at Reverend Jackson's church. What had initially felt like a foreign land now felt like a welcoming home. The initial apprehension and self-consciousness she'd felt were replaced by a sense of belonging, a feeling of genuine connection with people she had once judged and dismissed. She found herself forming meaningful relationships with individuals she would have previously avoided or stereotyped. She developed a close friendship with Sister Clara, an elderly woman who had shared her own experiences with prejudice and loss. Their conversations were filled with laughter, tears, and shared wisdom. Sister Clara's unwavering faith and her gentle spirit helped Martha to navigate her own emotional turmoil, offering guidance and support during moments of doubt and despair. She also forged a strong bond with Brother Samuel, a young man who had recently graduated from college and was actively involved in community outreach programs. Their shared passion for social justice led to countless conversations about inequality, injustice, and the need for systemic change. Brother Samuel's enthusiasm and his unwavering commitment to making a difference inspired Martha to become more actively involved in her community, challenging her to step outside of her comfort zone and to use her own skills and resources to help others. She found herself participating in church events and activities she would have previously avoided. She volunteered at the church's annual fundraiser, working alongside people from diverse backgrounds. She joined the church choir, her voice blending with the other voices in a harmonious expression of faith and community. She attended potlucks and social gatherings, sharing meals and stories with people she had once viewed as other. The interactions were not always easy. There were moments of awkwardness, moments of discomfort, moments of lingering prejudice. But the willingness of the community members to engage in honest and respectful dialogue, to address difficult issues with compassion and understanding, helped to overcome these obstacles. They challenged her assumptions, corrected her misconceptions, and helped her to see the world from a different perspective. She learned to appreciate the richness and diversity of human experience, recognizing the shared humanity that binds us together despite our differences. She discovered the beauty of community, the power of empathy, and the transformative potential of human connection. The support she received from the church community was invaluable, helping her to navigate her grief, to confront her prejudices, and to embrace a more just and compassionate worldview. The church became more than just a place of worship. It became a sanctuary, a refuge, a source of strength and support. It was a place where she felt safe, accepted, and loved. It was a place where she could be herself, without judgment, without fear. The acceptance she found there was profound, transformative, and deeply meaningful. It helped her to heal, to grow, to become a better person. She was no longer the same person she had been before. She had found a new family, a new sense of belonging, and a renewed sense of purpose. The journey was far from over, but she had the unwavering support of her community to guide her every step of the way. The bonds she formed were genuine, deep, and lasting, a testament to the power of forgiveness, understanding, and the transformative potential of human connection. A year had passed since Richard's death, a year that had witnessed a profound transformation in Martha's life. The raw, unfiltered anger that had consumed her in the aftermath of his passing had gradually given way to a quiet peace, a sense of serenity she hadn't known was possible. The bitterness that had once characterized her worldview had been replaced by a deep and abiding compassion, a willingness to see the world through the eyes of others, and a commitment to living a life of purpose and understanding. The change wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was a gradual unfolding, a slow and deliberate process of self-discovery and growth. The initial seed of doubt planted by the mysterious prayer had blossomed into a full-fledged awareness of her own prejudices, and she had actively worked to challenge and overcome them. The support of Reverend Jackson and the welcoming embrace of his church community had been instrumental in her journey, providing the guidance, support, and encouragement she needed to navigate the complexities of grief, loss, and self-reflection. She had learned to forgive herself for her past mistakes, to acknowledge her own imperfections, and to embrace the ongoing process of personal growth. She had let go of the anger and resentment that had held her captive for so long, freeing herself from the burden of hatred and prejudice. She had found solace in her newfound faith, a faith that had helped her to see the interconnectedness of all things, the shared humanity that binds us together, and the transformative power of compassion and understanding. She had formed meaningful relationships with people from diverse backgrounds, people she had once judged and dismissed. She had learned to appreciate the richness and diversity of human experience, recognizing the unique perspectives and contributions of each individual. She had discovered the beauty of community, the power of empathy, and the transformative potential of human connection. Her life was no longer defined by anger and resentment. It was defined by purpose and compassion. She was actively involved in her community, using her skills and resources to help others. She volunteered at the local community center, mentoring young people and providing support to those in need. She participated in social justice initiatives, advocating for equality and working to create a more just and equitable world. She used her voice to challenge injustice, to speak out against discrimination, and to promote understanding and tolerance. She had found a new sense of purpose, a sense of meaning that transcended her personal grief. She had discovered a joy in serving others, a fulfillment that came from making a positive impact on the world. Her life was no longer defined by loss. It was defined by love, compassion, and a commitment to making a difference. The transformation was complete, not in the sense that her journey was over, but in the sense that she had found peace, forgiveness, and a renewed sense of purpose. She had embraced a life of compassion and understanding, a life guided by faith and fueled by a deep and abiding love for humanity. The woman who had once stood rigidly by her husband's casket, consumed by anger and resentment, was gone. In her place stood a woman transformed, a woman empowered, a woman committed to living a life of purpose, a life dedicated to making the world a better place, one act of kindness at a time. Her journey was a testament to the power of forgiveness, the power of community, and the transformative potential of faith.